Hello, I'm Dr. Ryan Anderson, one of the co-founders of Telos U. I'm here today to talk to you about the talking stick. The talking stick is one of the basic tools that we use here at Telos U, but when used at the right time and in the right way, can be a very powerful tool in working through conflicts and helping our students get unstuck. So we want you to become very familiar with it and very confident in being able to utilize it. Now, it's important to recognize that there are times and circumstances under which using the talking stick is the right thing to do. However, there are times and circumstances under which using the talking stick isn't going to be the right tool for you. So one thing to keep in mind is that utilizing the talking stick certainly assumes that the student is in a place where they can still be somewhat flexible and where, although they may be under stress, they're still able to be reasonable and rational. We utilize another tool called the relationship continuum that can help you understand when it's the right time to use it. We won't train on that in this particular webinar right now and encourage you to take a look at it. But when we talk about the talking stick, the student needs to be in the green, not in the red where they're in full-blown crisis mode, or the yellow where they're in a great deal of stress and no longer able to operate in a way that's reasonable and rational. So making sure that both you and the other person you're wanting to have a talking stick with are still in the green is an important part of preparing to make sure you're using this tool at the right time. But when that's the case, the talking stick can be a very powerful tool to use. Now, there's more than one way to do the talking stick. You can use it with a facilitator. Now, it's highly recommended that you use a facilitator if you are working on some kind of a conflict that has been going on for a long time, or that is very emotionally charged, or tends to be a repeated conflict. You are capable of doing the talking stick with just you and another person, but we'd recommend that you do that only after you've gained some confidence in being able to use the talking stick with the help of a facilitator. Most of the time, in the kinds of conflicts that we'll be working on here at TLOS, we're going to recommend that you utilize a facilitator and that you learn how to become a facilitator for a talking stick as well. So the role of the facilitator is very clear. First, they provide the structure of the talking stick and help both of the parties utilizing the talking stick to work within that structure. That means that they can refocus and redirect either or both parties as needed. Another thing that they're charged with doing is making sure that they help either one of the parties not just keep on talking and talking beyond what the other party can reflect and take all in one bite. So we talk about breaking things down into smaller pieces, into bite-sized chunks. While the different parties are talking, we want to try to minimize talk terms to 1 minute, maybe 2 minutes at a time before we're allowing the other person to reflect back. Now, that's not something that comes to us naturally. So sometimes the facilitator needs to help both sides make sure they are breaking things up into these bite-sized chunks. They're also responsible for helping both sides make sure that they are maintaining ownership of their own thoughts, feelings, and actions, since this particular emotional state is really important for being able to have a successful talking stick. So if they notice one side or the other struggling with that, they can continue to have them work on what they're expressing until they can find a way to express it where they are owning their own thoughts, feelings, and actions. They can also help to reframe, reflect, and deepen as needed. If someone's really getting stuck in trying to either communicate what they're feeling or reflect back what the other person's feeling. But the facilitator should not take over either the role of the speaker or the listener. And their position should be very clear. They are an ally for the relationship and for the solution. The facilitator should avoid taking either side in the conflict. The goals of the talking stick are very simple and straightforward. First, they are to reduce rigidity on the part of both parties so that they are going to be in a better position to understand both sides of the issue and work towards some kind of solution that is mutually acceptable. Second is, if this is done correctly, it should help soften difficult emotions that the two parties are having about each other. It should also help both parties broaden their perspective about the situation, including their contribution to it and the other person's needs in the process as well. And if done well, it should help to de escalate the conflict, help both sides find common ground, and help them work towards finding a mutually agreeable solution. So, the structure of the talking stick is important because it's designed to fulfill several specific purposes. First of all, it slows down the process of communication and keeps it from just running away and escalating. It also should assist both sides in the conversation to fully explore their own thoughts and feelings rather than going off of the pieces that they are just initially aware of, to fully communicate their own thoughts and feelings to the other person, and to fully own their own thoughts, feelings, and reactions as something that is theirs to take responsibility for and not to blame the other person for. But it's also to help them to learn to listen and understand and hopefully connect with the other person in a way that helps to open up possibilities for solutions. In a talking stick, there are two positions at all points in time for the two parties. The first position is that of a speaker. Now, while the person is speaking, they have several specific responsibilities. They should work on taking ownership and responsibility for their own thoughts, feelings, and perspectives, and recognize that each one of those are subjective. Neither one of the parties has a corner on the objective truth about what's actually going on. And so recognizing, look, I'm looking at the world through my lens, but I know there are imperfections in my lens. And although I'm having emotional reactions to the other person, they are my emotions and my reactions. They are not caused by the other person. So, well, of course, there is one caveat here. In abusive situations, this idea can be used as a weapon. This is assuming that this is not an abusive situation going on. But in a normal, regular conflict, these ideas hold up. Second, while the speaker is talking, they should take full ownership of their thoughts, feelings, and perspectives in a way where they're saying, look, I recognize that these are something that I am in charge of and that I can change and that are my responsibility. And they seek to communicate that in a way that is clear, that's concrete, and non reactive. Sometimes it can be very hard for people to know exactly what they're thinking or feeling or why they are having the emotional reaction that they're having. The facilitator can help them continue to explore and express this, but their job is to do the very best they can to share their world with the other person in a way that the other person can understand. Now, this doesn't need to be done in a mechanical way. A lot of us are familiar, though, with certain tools that can help us out. Some people like to use I feel statements. Sometimes this kind of structure can be useful where you're saying, in this situation, and give a concrete description. I find myself reacting by, talk about your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And what would be helpful to me is give a clear description of what you would like to see. Now, it's very important to understand it's not very helpful to say, I'd like to see you stop doing what you're doing. It's much more helpful to say, in this situation, this is what I would like to see from you. That would be helpful for me. So focus on what you would want the other person to be doing rather than what you would want the other person to stop doing. And keep in mind that if you're going to be asking the other person to do something, you've got to be willing to put something on the table that you're going to be doing as well. Now, the role of the listener may sound simple, but it actually can be pretty complicated and emotionally challenging for a lot of us. Their role is to simply genuinely listen, to understand, and not to respond, not to argue, not to refute, but to really work on entering the world of the other person, try to understand what it is they're experiencing, and try to look at it from a point of view of saying, okay, they're talking about their legitimate, real experience. Can I step into that with some compassion and try to understand what it is? As a part of this, there are several things that we need to strongly avoid. We need to avoid blaming. We need to avoid any mind reading. So, assuming that we know what the other person is thinking or feeling or what their motives are, and trying to tell them, you think X, Y, and Z. We need to avoid straw man arguments. For those of you who may not be familiar with this term, the idea of a straw man argument or a straw man fallacy is instead of reflecting back to the other person what their actual point of view is, you create sort of a caricature of it, a cartoon variety that is exaggerated or minimized or distorted. And you use that because it's much easier to defeat rather than what the other person's actual experiences are. We need to avoid passive aggression and also just being vague. It's very important to be very specific and to be very concrete in what we express to the other person. And we also need to make sure that we avoid minimizing or diminishing the other person's experience or being so focused on our own experience that we make no room for the other person's experience. So the actual format of utilizing a talking stick is not that complicated. There are essentially two positions. In the first position, person A is in that speaker position and person B listens. And again, we try to keep the talk time for each individual chunk from being too long, maybe 1 to 2 minutes. So when that talk time has filled itself, person A should stop talking and allow person B to reflect back what they heard and understood, and to keep on working on reflecting that back until person A feels like what they're hearing from the other person is what they were trying to express. Then person A can speak again in another talk turn and can keep on going through that process of speaking and reflecting until person A's whole idea has been conveyed. Then the two switch. In position 2, person B speaks and person A listens. And again, when the talk time is full, person A reflects back what they have heard and understood until person B is able to say, yes, that sounds like what I was saying. And they continue to do that process of speaking and reflecting until the entirety of person B's idea is conveyed. From there, they'll trade back and forth between position 1 and 2 until both people feel like they've been able to fully express their side, and both people feel that the other person has been able to accurately reflect back what they are saying in a way that is true to the way they mean it. So once we've completed that particular portion, we then continue to use position 1 and position 2 to explore potential solutions. Now, for the person in the role of the facilitator, during this part of the discussion, they may use prompts utilizing the consultant pattern, which is another one of our tools that we train in a webinar, in family therapy, and also in family days, to help them as needed. However, if both sides are able to explore options effectively, it's not necessary to utilize consultant pattern prompts. Out of this, there should be a very clear action plan that is described and agreed to by both parties. And again, it needs to be clear, concrete, and very well communicated. And from there, you should also make sure that you put together a specific time frame for following up on how the action plan is going and for problem solving as needed. So you see, this is a relatively simple tool. If done incorrectly, without owning thoughts and feelings or really listening to understand, it tends to be ineffective. But if both people are able to own both sides of this well, both the speaking and the listening, then this tends to be a very, very powerful tool that helps to work through all kinds of conflicts. Again, we encourage you to work on this, to practice this, to become very confident in your ability to use it because it is a highly effective tool for resolving conflicts.